everybody. I'm so excited to start our Lunch and Learn today. We've got an excellent guest here. We're going to be talking about how to be entrepreneurial in a mentoring relationship. And so I know as you all are CEOs or chief executives in your company, how can we go about making sure that we are constantly staying innovative in our mentoring relationship and we're challenging our respective executives to keep being innovative and pushing the envelope forward? Sometimes it's easy to get stagnant. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the same things that we're already doing. And ultimately, I recognize that by getting paired in a mentoring relationship with another executive, having that other person can be difficult, can be interesting. And so ultimately, this is all about how can you go about making the most out of this mentoring relationship with your fellow executive. Our guest is Annie Meehan. So I'll just start with this. I'll start with a few questions for Annie. Do your word choices have an impact on the people around you? Are you an influencer looking to better yourself and your community? Could you use some actionable tools to remove obstacles that get in the way of living your best life? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you are in the right spot. Annie Meehan has worked in investment banking for 9 years, owned and operated 2 fitness franchise locations, and grew and led a team of 250 plus sales professionals. Annie, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have you on to talk about how to be entrepreneurial in a mentoring relationship.
Absolutely. Today I get to spend my time speaking and writing and teaching other people how to be those entrepreneurs. So yes, or be leaders with entrepreneurial minds. So
that's awesome. And so with our audience today of executives, they're in these mentoring relationships with the fellow executive. And one of the bigger things that probably is on their mind is, how am I going to maybe do something a little bit differently that I might not have considered? I mean, what are the actionable items that I might be able to take, the nuggets of wisdom that I might be able to take from these mentor relationships with these other executives? I guess maybe to start off, what is a great way that I as an executive can go about setting myself up in the right mindset to be open-minded to learning what a fellow executive might share with me? And how can I then go about applying that in my company?
Yeah. Are these executives in the same company or 2 different companies being paired together?
Different companies, yeah.
Okay.
Great question.
That's what I thought. I wanted to make sure. I think it's a lot about ego, right? Because when we're in a leadership role, we have to be strong. People are looking to us to have the answers, looking to us to hold it together, looking to us to be clear, to be giving direction. And so I think the first thing that has to be established in an executive mentorship relationship is it's safe to be vulnerable here. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know everything. And no matter how successful you are or your business is, I don't expect you to be perfect here, because I think the enormous pressure that is put on executives, sometimes by themselves and sometimes by their company, makes them feel like they got to hold their breath and hold it all together and be perfectly together. So I think when they're establishing that mentor relationship, I think it's really important to establish right away some ground rules, some confidentiality, that it's safe, you can be vulnerable, you can be authentic, you can be afraid here, you can be messy here, and I'm here to support you and build you up. I think to stay innovative in that is to talk about, let's look back first at how you've done things and what changes you've already made, and then look forward as, like, how can you still continue to engage with your team to make them feel supported, but also strongly led, but with a servant heart. And so I think that those challenges for leaders, they can be really honest with each other and have a great understanding of each other, because sometimes when you're with someone who's doesn't have that same pressure, responsibility, or feel like they need to be held together and have clear direction, can be overwhelming, and other people might not understand that level of pressure. So to have a great mentoring relationship is to be able to say, this is a safe place for you to be honest and authentic, but also, how can I help you be better? And how can I help support you in being that? I find a lot of executives, when they start to let down their ego a little and be more authentically themselves and vulnerable, without all the fear out there, but just some, like, it's not easy, that people listen to them even more, stay open to them, and that there's a great understanding among executives, all that pressure. So to establish an understanding of each other, ground rules, and support of what has worked, what changes they've already made, and how they can support each other in making more changes, continuing to be creative and innovative as they move forward.
Yeah, that vulnerability is so key. I really feel, I know that vulnerability is the key component to building trust. And so I know that as an executive, as you're building this mentoring relationship with this fellow executive, I know that trust is so critical. The best way to start it is to be the first to be vulnerable. And it's not about being it's not about a brag fest. It's not about showcasing all the great things going on, because that's not vulnerable. That's kind of the facade you put on to the rest of the world, which is fine. It shows people that things are going great. But in this mentoring relationship, the best way to leverage that is to be vulnerable, is to share the things that are going on with your world that are frustrating you. I mean, as we've compared it before, it's like a therapist going to another therapist for therapy. That's what these executive mentoring relationships are like. And if you're not comfortable with being vulnerable, you are really hampering your ability to get the most out of this experience. And so we want to ensure that when you're sharing with your fellow executive, that you're saying, these are the things that are not going on so great. And when you're responding and you're hearing that from another executive, that you're open-minded and you're following up with questions, not saying, hey, if I were you, I would do this. We don't want to be talking like that, because it creates a tier, it creates a hierarchy that I'm better than you. So instead, as opposed to saying, if I were you, I would do this, ask questions to further understand what the problem is and look at ways that they're going about solving that, and share things that maybe you've tried before in your past. What are your thoughts on that, Annie?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I think one of the big key words that you said that's so, so important in any mentoring relationship is listen. Just listen and ask questions. I always say ask at least 3 questions to get more information. And if you want to ask a 4th question, it is, do you want feedback? Do you want ideas how you could do that different? Not just deciding and giving those answers. So I always ask people, when you're in these mentoring relationships, make sure you ask permission to give your ideas. Sometimes people just want to vent. Sometimes people just need, I'm very much process out loud person. So I need to talk it out. But usually when I'm talking, I'm creating my own solution. I'm going to figure that out. So I don't want a solution right away. I want someone to help me process the information and get it out. So I love the listening. I love the additional questions. I think that there are times where it's okay to say, hey, can I give you I have some thoughts. Are you open to some suggestions how you could do that different? But I never think we should start with that. And I never think we should give them without the permission to give them. I think those establishing, and I don't know how you set up yours exactly, but having some really clear questions right away when any mentoring relationship starts, especially at that executive level, like, just so you know, you have nothing to prove to me here. Sometimes we're so busy showing our resume. Sometimes I don't like my bio to be read, because I'm like, okay, you don't need to know. I'm just another person, right? I'm just here to speak to you today and teach you. And I think sometimes it's our guard, it's our protection. So when you're an executive, you want to say, I've grown the company 25%, I've done this, I've done that. And you want to talk about all your accolades. And that doesn't really help a mentoring relationship. Instead, it's about, where are you struggling? How can I support you? How can I be of encouragement, or a listening ear, or a safe place, like a counseling session, like you said? I think it's really important to have some great, clear questions to start every mentoring relationship, to create some ground rules so people do feel safe. Because for me, it's fairly natural to be vulnerable, but the people I work with, some of them don't tell anybody. And the things they tell me, they don't even tell their spouse or their best friend, because they're so busy looking like they have it all together, because they think people won't believe in them if they look what they perceive as weak, and I would say authentic. But some people say, well, you can't let people know you're struggling or things are hard, because they'll think you're weak. Well, that's not true. They'll think you're human. And you do have to pick and choose who you share with. You can't put it on the front page of the paper, but absolutely people, and it's hard to be vulnerable. So I think that building trust for some people comes quicker, and for other people not so much. So listening, being supportive, not being judgmental, not trying to one-up each other, especially when it's 2 very successful people. Remembering that no matter how successful we are, we all have our struggles and our challenges along the way. So listen.
I really love that sentiment. I love a few things of what you said. One, asking for permission to give feedback and advice. I think that's a really great tip. That's a massive nugget there, because I know I'm guilty of this. I often jump right in. I just dive headfirst. I'm like, oh man, what would you think about doing it like this way? What would you think about doing it like that way? And I hadn't even considered, like, were they even asking for me to ask questions of, what would you think about doing it in these different ways? So that, I think, is such a great piece of advice. I think the other big piece of advice that I really love that you said was, you're not showing your resume to everybody. This is not a brag fest. This is not, these mentors are not your prospective investors or customers. They are here to connect with you and build a deeper bond with you. They're here to learn from you and to learn from the mistakes that you've made and the areas that you feel weak. Because ultimately we know that that makes them better, and it just makes you so much more relatable. At the end of the day, it makes a relationship so much more productive because you can relate to each other. It's, you know, I know that I going to my own entrepreneurial CEO mentors, I had a recent scenario where something had happened. I was really frustrated about it, and I felt comfortable opening up and sharing the situation with them. And there were really only the handful of people that I felt comfortable saying, like, hey, here's where I'm probably not as strong. Like, I might not be as emotionally intelligent as like maybe I should be, or maybe I'd like to be. And I think this is potentially hampering my ability to be a good leader. And that was for me to just be able to say that and put that out to the world, to this other executive that I meet with for mentorship, man, that felt incredible. It made me realize that I don't have to be this perfect person, and that they're also going through something similar. And so I know personally from my own experience that there is so much value to being vulnerable. If you're sitting and you're only talking about all the great things going on and not the issues, it can be very difficult to find value in that relationship. If I'm only talking about all these increased sales and all these other big things that are going on, and we're growing like crazy, and like, the worst one is like, I'm just hustling over here super hard. I don't think it's about that. This is not what this relationship is about. It's about being able to relate and connect and be able to kind of like take your emotional weight and put it off of people. And I know for a lot of executives, I mean, right now the statistics I believe are that majority are men. In terms of right now, majority of executives are men. And I think as a man, sometimes I will want to put on this, like, I've got everything good, and like, I shouldn't talk about my emotions, and that I shouldn't put them out there because my conditioning has been, those are not manly things to do. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Annie? I know I'm kind of going in different directions. I know obviously the topic of this is entrepreneurship and a mentoring relationship, but I think that this, you know, to unlock the innovative outcomes from these mentoring relationships and this like entrepreneurial opportunities in the mentoring relationship starts with vulnerability. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, first, I love what you said, that you give yourself credit for being intuitive enough to be aware that you're not as emotionally intelligent as you wish you were. Unfortunately, that is a challenge for many, many people, and way more men than women, and why men in many ways feel more comfortable talking to a woman sometimes about their vulnerability, because they feel a little safer to let down a little ego sometimes, not always, and because women will say that's hard. And I think it's a natural emotion, a more comfortable natural emotion for men to go to frustration right away. I'm frustrated, I'm upset, but not to say I'm scared, I'm sad, this is hard, I'm overwhelmed. And that communication key of an open and honest level of being emotionally affected by what's happening around us. I also, in the beginning of what you said, I was thinking about just talking about some other speakers the other day and watching them, like, they're always selling themselves, even to each other. And it's like, just stop. You have nothing to prove here. Like, stop telling everybody all your accolades. Like, just be who you are, and people will like you or they won't. And you won't be everybody's cup of tea, but you will find the right people. And I think when we are an influencer, a leader, a boss, an executive in a company, it is so natural and normal for us to talk about what we've done and what our company has done. And did you know? And just so you know, and this is where I bought it, and this is where I got in the role, and now I'm here. I think that takes time. And even if I say, hey, you guys, you're going to be mentors with each other, you're both executives, leave your ego at the door, you know, talk about what you're struggling with, talk about what you've changed and what you wish you could still change. It might take a few meetings before you can establish some rules, guidelines in the beginning, but it might take a little bit before people feel fully comfortable to really open up, because they don't know you, and because being emotional more often for men is more challenging. Like, I'm good, I'm a little frustrated about this, but maybe inside they're in turmoil, you know, and processing that through excessive drinking or bad choice or whatever. Because I work with people in the business level, but then it always turns into relationships, right? And when I see relationships struggling, often it's, to me, women that come to me say, my husband doesn't talk to me, or he's never emotional, or nothing affects him. Well, it's not really a true story. It's just that he can't always articulate on an emotional level how he is being affected. And by the time they're ready to leave, the guy's waking up to, oh, something might be wrong here. And so I think all of those are real components of any relationship. And a mentor relationship, sometimes you come in wanting, like, I'm going to be totally honest with this mentor. I'm all in. I'm open to this. But then it feels scary. It feels vulnerable to say, I don't have it all together. I'm struggling at home, or my business is not where I thought it would be, or, oh my gosh, I keep investing so much that there's none to take out, and I have so many people to manage. Or right now with COVID, so many executives are having to make those difficult decisions of laying people off, cutting staff, and that it's painful. It's painful to watch people be devastated and know it's the right thing for the company, but that families will be hurt by it. And so I think there's so much going on. I feel like there could not be a better time than now, Garrett, that people need a mentor. They need somebody objective that they can talk to that isn't fully invested in the company or in their personal relationships, that they can be honest with. And so I hope always in a mentor relationship, people feel safe to be vulnerable, to be authentic, to be emotional, to expand their emotions beyond frustration and irritation, to be like, I'm scared, I'm sad. And that can show up in frustration, but that fear is a big driver behind a lot of emotions. And then how we express that, whether it's sadness or anger or frustration, has to do with like how vulnerable we're willing to be. Because to me, usually it's about fear is about sadness and loss and out of control, but we can act it out of frustration. And so I hope that your executive mentors will allow themselves to talk about what COVID feels like, what not being where they want to be feels like, where struggles, where the pressure to perform positively and successfully in an environment that has added stress right now, that they do sign up and get a great mentor to help them unpack some of that and be safe to people that can be vulnerable. Because many executives tell me it's the loneliest time in their life, that they don't want to bring it home to their house. They don't have anyone inside they can talk to about it. And so they really desperately need a safe mentoring relationship where they can be honest, be authentic, and be vulnerable. So.
I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think obviously our topic's about how to be entrepreneurial in a mentor relationship. And so I think maybe some executives are listening to this right now and they're thinking to themselves, well, what does vulnerability have anything to do with that? And I guess I'll share even an anecdotal story. I know in my own personal executive horizontal mentoring relationships, when I've been vulnerable is when I've then gotten to my next greatest breakthroughs. I remember about like a little over a year ago, when we were like a year and a half ago, when we were realizing when our whole model was just predicated on higher education mentorship, and I was realizing it wasn't working. And it really sucked to like acknowledge that. But the sooner I was able to say, to these other executives that I'm in a mentoring relationship with, like, I don't know if this is the right model. Like, I think we're onto something. I think we're doing a lot. And I think we're gathering a ton of data, and we've got a ton of research that backs horizontal mentorship and work orientation, all the things we're doing. But I don't know if we're in the right market, and I don't know what the best next step forward is. When I was comfortable with opening up about that and sharing, like, I don't know what the next step is, that is when the opportunity started to like flow my way. I ended up going with the river instead of swimming upstream. And essentially I would have these other executives that were mentoring me show me or either bring opportunities my way and potentially lead to sales, or show me opportunities that I had not considered before and provide introductions. And it wasn't because I had asked for any of those things. It just was because I was vulnerable and I didn't know the answer. And people want to help and be able to identify solutions when you are vulnerable. And so I don't know, what I've observed is that people are much more likely to want to help you when you're vulnerable and you're saying, maybe I don't actually know what the answers are, than when you're saying, hey, can you do this thing for me? What are your thoughts? Have you experienced similar things, Annie?
Yeah, absolutely. My first thought is just what you were saying about your story is like, basically what you were saying is, it's as simple as this: I'm open. Because I think vulnerability is about, I'm open. I don't have the answer. And when we think we have all the answers, we're shut. So even if you tell me something, I can't really hear it. I can't get through. But if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing exactly, or it's not working exactly how I visioned, I'm open, means I'm open to ideas. I'm open to advice. I'm open to new people. I'm open to opportunity. And because you are open, opportunities could come in. When you've got it all figured out and you're just moving forward, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm doing it, you tend to block things that could have been helpful to you. And so I love that. I was thinking about one of the executives I worked with once. He had a fairly big company he was leading, and many different departments, but one was a factory. And so I encouraged him to start his day by walking through the factory and just saying good morning to everyone. Now, it might not seem like a big deal, but he had never done it before. And that alone humbled him a little bit. And then he starts seeing, I'm like, do you know your employees? Do you know their stories? Do you know their struggles and what they love about their job or what they don't? And then they start doing contests and stuff through their HR, but just to get communication going. But I think when you're open to a new idea, as silly as saying good morning to people, as silly as saying, are we even going in the right direction? As big as saying, oh my gosh, do we got to do a revamp? I think that you lead yourself to that. So every time I'm open, which I always feel like if you're going to be successful in anything, you have to be learning. You have to be a lifelong learner. You have to be reading and listening and watching. And so when people are shut down, when their ego prevents them from realizing that they have any weakness, which we all have, then it stops them from being innovative, by getting to that next level, by being better, by being open to another opportunity that they might not have seen. But what if you're open in our mentoring relationship, then somebody's idea is going to not only like think about it, but it could get in, and we could change something and redirect to CEOs from educators, rethink about how you can serve people and what you feel called to do. So, yeah, I like that a lot.
I love that. And I think I'm thinking to myself right now, what might an objective one might think to themselves right now in this, objective of vulnerability is like, well, is this concept of setting goals and being vulnerable like opposing forces, or can they work together? Because I think there was a good point you brought up of like, we feel the need to know everything. And I think sometimes that can be very easily insinuated as being the same as goals and setting out like a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan or a 1-year plan or a quarterly rock. How can we distinguish the difference between those goals that we've set for ourselves and our ability to be vulnerable?
I like that. I'm hugely goal driven. I have lots of goals all the time when I'm working on, but I also know in order to be successful, I have to be completely open and flexible to that goal changing at any given time. And so I think that goals give us a direction, but that doesn't mean there won't be detours. My first book, Past Detours and Possibilities, is that I kind of believe we all are on a path, but everybody has detours. But if you don't let your detours define you, if you just think, I wonder what the possibility is here, that's when we learn and grow, and that's where we find success. And so I think it's good to have goals. It's good to have a vision, but I think you have to be truly successful, you have to be flexible and open to that goal changing, completely going away, being adjusted, being pushed back to another time, because then you're fluid and you're always moving, right? Like if we become too rigid, we're more breakable. But if we're fluid and we're like, okay, I'm just going to go with today, that did not really make sense, that goal. How can I be flexible? What am I not? I always think a great question is, what am I not seeing? And Brene Brown, who I've never really watched or heard of, but I know who she is. People call me the Brene Brown of the Midwest, and they're like, Annie, you show us how to be vulnerable and authentic. And so many people are so busy protecting their image that they forget. And social media has definitely enhanced that we're supposed to look a certain way and have that together. But when we can just be like, hey, I'm a little messy, I'm a little silly, but you know what? I'm really passionate about the work I do. I think that when leaders let down a little bit of their ego, a little bit of their wall, what happens is the whole company starts to open up and flow better in conversation and compassion. And people like to be around people that they know and that they feel like, you get me. And not everything in your life is perfect, and not everything in my life is perfect, but we can still support each other in this area. So I think it has to be fluid. I think goals are important. I have lots of goals, but they're always fluid. Like they're always changing or adjusting for that season. It could be just for a temporary, but I have to be flexible with them. When I teach people how to be speakers, I always say 2 things. 1, it's not about you. And 2, you have to be flexible because it will always change. And if you cannot go with the flow and be flexible, you're going to be rigid and people aren't going to know how to deal with that. And I think as leaders, we really have to be flexible. I think everyone that has the privilege of leadership is a position of influence, and people are watching you and watching your expectation. And if they always look perfect and they have it all together, that's an enormous pressure on their staff to look like they're perfect and they always have it together. And nobody is perfect. Everybody has their struggles. So
I love that. So are there some suggested questions? I love the question you had of what am I not seeing? I think that's a fantastic question that we can ask in our executive mentoring relationships. What are other questions that we can be intentionally focused on asking so that we can get ourselves in a position not only where we're being vulnerable, but we're helping someone else be vulnerable with us. We're helping kind of crack that nut almost.
Yeah, and definitely people will do more than they see, than they say, right? So if I tell you be vulnerable with me, but I'm like, yep, everything's great. So we got to role model it, right? We have to role model that it's okay. And somebody has to take that first step. I love, I'm asking myself, what am I not seeing? But I think that's a really great question to ask a mentor is, hey, do you mind if I tell you some things that I'm hearing that maybe you're not? Because I always think like sometimes we can reflect back something that someone else might be missing. So they might be saying, you know, I'm really having struggles with my employment. They're kind of negative. They're showing up late. People are dragging in. There's not any smiling in the community anymore. And so asking someone, you know, is there anything you're not seeing here? Here's what I'm thinking. Have you tried this or that? But first asking that, again, it's always about asking permission to, do you mind, Garrett, if I tell you I'm seeing some things that you're not? Do you mind if I reflect to you what I think I'm seeing that you're not? And you have the right also to always say, you know what, I'm not really open to that right now. And I think that can take time for some people to hear because some people don't want to hear anything that doesn't feel, I wouldn't even say it's negative. I would say it's helpful encouragement and ideas, but some people feel like it's corrective criticism or it's just criticism. And that's a humbling piece too, to be able to be open to you giving me some ideas. But if you're a healthy person and you're open to a great mentoring relationship, asking those questions, what am I not seeing? Do you mind if I tell you what I see that you might not be seeing? What is working for you? Always I go back to what is a success that you are having? And then what is the biggest struggle? Is this the struggle? And it's always like asking those repeated questions because somebody might think the struggle is the numbers, but as they dig into it, it might actually be performance or employees or something else missing. So we have to really look into what's going on and asking those specific, what am I not seeing? What could be underneath that? Where do you think that's coming from? Asking those good questions that keep clarifying the struggle and then looking for their idea. What are some of your solutions to correct it? Do you mind if I tell you some things I think might be able to correct it? But always letting the person that has the struggle first look at their perspective of what they might need to change.
Yeah, I love that. So that leads to kind of two follow-up questions. How can I ensure that, one, I'm open-minded to this idea of maybe learning that the thing that I think is my obstacle, the thing that I think is my vulnerability, is not in actually fact my vulnerability? How can I be open-minded to this concept that, okay, well, I think it's the numbers, I think it's the statistics, I think it's like the sales team's not doing enough reps. Could it be something else? How can I ensure that I'm open-minded to something like that or a different perspective? And then two, how can I also be open-minded to the idea of or this concept? Because I think, you know, one objective that I might hear is, well, there's something personally going on with me between my spouse and and I don't know if it's relevant for this mentoring relationship. Then the question you have to ask yourself is it affecting your performance? Is it affecting the way that you feel and act at work? Even if it's not affecting your output, is it affecting the way that you feel and act at work? Because your people can tell. Your people can read your body language. They can read your physical facial features. They can read the things in the way that you treat other people. And so if you think it's not relevant, but it's somehow, some ways impacting your performance, how can we justify that it is in our mind relevant to share it in this mentoring relationship? So, sorry, two questions is, how can we open ourselves up to learning something that maybe we hadn't considered before from us being vulnerable? And two, how can we justify sharing things that we may not necessarily know if they are or are not relevant to our work output?
Yeah. The first question, again, I think all of this stuff needs to be established as early on in a mentoring relationship as possible. But when I've asked your permission to give you some ideas and I start giving you ideas on things I'm seeing or things that might be helpful to you, one way to know if you're open is if you start responding right away when I start talking, if you start defending, well, we're doing it this way, and this is what, that defense and that response doesn't, you're not open, you're shut down. So I would ask you, Garrett, are you open to some ideas? If you said yes, I'd say, hey, would you mind grabbing, and we do this with our mastermind, would you mind grabbing a pad of paper and a pen? And just for the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to give you some thoughts. Just write them down. Some might not fit you at all, but maybe we'll find one or two. And then as the mentor, I might say, I thought about this, 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 and I might have 10 ideas and you write them all down. And then I would stop and say, do any of those resonate with you? So that's the first thing to knowing if I'm open, is if I'm willing to listen and if I'm willing to receive. And even if I give you 10 ideas and you're like, none of those are going to work, I've planted a seed that another day or a week or a month you might still be thinking about. And maybe none of them will work, but maybe through reading the 10 I have, you're going to think of something else of your own that will. So being open to listening, to writing it down, and to responding. And the second question, I had to answer it now.
Oh yeah, the second question was just, how do I open myself up with to be comfortable with sharing things that I don't actually know if it's relevant to the mentoring relationship?
Yeah. And so I'm as a coach and consultant, I always start my sessions with clients saying, listen, I know that you hired me to get that promotion at work, or I know you hired me to start a job, but know that in this relationship, oftentimes, whether you hire me for a professional or personal reason, it all overlaps. So know that all of them, just like you said, Garrett, is everything we do affects other areas of our life. And if we're unhappy at home, we bring that to work. And if we're unhappy at work, we bring that home. And so I know that even though you hired me for this specific topic or this area of your business, I'm open to anything, and it's a confidential relationship. And so I think that in these mentoring relationships, it's really important in the beginning to establish this is an open relationship to us, talking about your professional struggles, your personal struggles, your professional successes, your personal successes, because we're one person. And even though we have different compartments and different departments of our life, we're one person. And so I can't imagine a strong, healthy mentorship relationship that doesn't at times cross over into the personal and into the professional. Now, somebody might say, which is their choice, I don't want to talk about that at all. But let me tell you, if your kid's calling because they're desperately sick at home and you're trying to focus on work, you can't do it. If your marriage is struggling and you're trying to perform your best, it's going to distract you. And so I think that establishing in the beginning, and that's why, and some people say, no, I'm good personally. And I say, okay. And the longer I coach with someone or consult, things come up because that's life. And I'm always like, it doesn't matter to me. You can use the time how you choose. And I'm here to support and encourage you and keep a safe tube for you to speak about whatever you need to. And so I think that being open that either might come up right from the get-go and having both people be on the same page is important. And some people are so private that they might say, I only want to talk about work and I only want to hear about your work. And then you have to decide, are you the right fit for me? And I'm sure you guys do some of that establishing beforehand, but most strong, healthy accountability mentoring relationships involve both our personal and professional lives because they're very intertwined. Whether people want them to be or not, they are. So establishing from the beginning that we will be talking about life, and life has lots of components.
That's awesome. Well, Annie, this was excellent. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was a really good lunch and learn on just how to be entrepreneurial in a mentor relationship. How can our audience connect with you and learn more about you?
Yeah, I'm Annie Meehan out of Minneapolis, and I'm a professional speaker. So if you just Google Annie Meehan, that's my website, is Annie Meehan, and I have a little over 200 videos on YouTube and books and encouragement. So if I can mentor or encourage you or support you in any way, just Google my name and you will find some encouragement. And thanks so much for listening, and I hope this was super helpful so you can live an exceptional life too.
Thanks, Annie. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.